King Solomon's paradox: why strategy always looks easier from outside the building. Organizations love rational thinking right until rational thinking threatens the internal peace. That is when things become interesting. Because from the outside, strategy usually looks simple, almost painfully simple. You look at another organization and you immediately see the problem. Too many priorities, too many meetings, too many dashboards, too little ownership. Everyone is busy, nobody is focused. The roadmap looks less like a strategy and more like a diplomatic agreement between departments that stopped trusting each other 3 years ago. And you think, come on, this is obvious. Then you go back to your own organization, and somehow the same obvious things become very complicated. Suddenly saying no is not just prioritization. It is politics, it is trust, it is budget, it is visibility. It is someone's project, someone's reputation, someone's team, someone's future promotion. And this is where King Solomon enters the meeting room. There is a well-known psychological idea called King Solomon's paradox. The basic idea is simple. People are often much wiser when they give advice to others than when they deal with their own problems. From a distance, we can think clearly. We see patterns. We notice contradictions. We can separate emotion from logic. But when the same problem is ours, everything changes. Now, we are not just thinking, we are involved. We have history, we have relationships, we have things to lose. And this matters a lot now, especially in product work, leadership, AI, and organizational strategy. Because many companies today are not short of information. They are not short of frameworks. They are not short of dashboards, workshops, or strategy documents. In fact, many organizations can describe their own problems in impressive detail. They know they have too many priorities. They know technical debt is growing. They know stakeholders bypass process when pressure gets high. They know meetings are eating the calendar. They know the roadmap is overloaded. And still, very little changes. That is the interesting part. The problem is not that organizations do not see their dysfunction. Very often they see it perfectly. They just cannot act on it without disturbing the system. Let's be honest, most product leaders are very good at diagnosing other companies. Put an experienced product person in a workshop with another organization, and within an hour, they will usually identify the real problems. They will say, you do not have a prioritization problem, you have a decision-making problem. Or your roadmap is not a roadmap, it is a queue of stakeholder promises. Or you are calling it agility, but actually you are just reacting to everything. And people will nod, because the diagnosis sounds intelligent, it sounds mature, it sounds professionally correct. Then the same product leader returns to their own company and spends 3 months in meetings where 17 initiatives are all marked as critical. This is not hypocrisy, it is psychology. Outside the organization, we think analytically. Inside the organization, we think relationally. These are not the same mode of thinking. From the outside, you see the system. From the inside, you feel the consequences. This is why consultants often look smarter than internal leaders. Not always because they are smarter. Sometimes they simply have distance. They are not carrying 5 years of unresolved tension between departments. They do not remember the failed project from 2021 that still makes everyone nervous. They do not depend on next year's budget. They are not trying to preserve trust with the stakeholder who keeps escalating directly to the executive team. Distance creates clarity. But internal leadership requires consequences. And consequences change everything. This is where things get tricky. A product manager can very easily tell another company, you need stronger prioritization, and that is probably true. But inside their own organization, prioritization often means saying no to someone powerful, or delaying something that has already been promised, or admitting that the team cannot do everything, or telling leadership that the current plan is mathematically impossible. And suddenly, the beautiful, clean framework becomes much less beautiful. The problem is not the roadmap itself. The problem is what the roadmap protects. It protects relationships. It protects expectations. It protects internal peace. Sometimes it protects people from having difficult conversations. This is also why innovation becomes so strange inside organizations. Almost every company says it wants innovation. Innovation sounds excellent in a presentation. It sounds modern, adaptive, brave, but then a small experiment appears, and suddenly the experiment needs alignment and risk assessment and legal review and stakeholder approval and business justification and a communication plan and maybe a steering committee, because apparently no experiment is complete without a steering committee. At some point, the experiment becomes so heavy that it stops being an experiment. It becomes a protected corporate ritual. The same thing is happening with AI. Many organizations now say they need an AI strategy, but often this means something quite safe. A prototype, a demo, a few AI-generated meeting summaries, a slide with the words AI-powered somewhere on it. The much harder question is this: what happens if AI actually works? Not as a toy, not as a demo, but as a real operational force. What happens if information starts moving faster? What happens if expertise becomes more distributed? What happens if decisions can be prepared in minutes instead of weeks? What happens if some coordination layers become less necessary? That is where the anxiety begins. Because AI is not only a technology question, it is a power question. It changes who knows what, who decides what, who controls what, who becomes more useful, and who becomes less central, and organizations do not easily accept changes that redistribute influence, even when those changes make strategic sense. So instead of real transformation, many companies move towards ceremonial transformation. They adopt the language of change, but they keep the structure almost untouched. They sound modern while staying very familiar, and honestly, that may be one of the most corporate behaviors ever invented. Here is the uncomfortable part. Sometimes the safest decision wins not because people are stupid, it wins because the organization is designed to reward safety. Imagine a leadership team reviewing 3 possible initiatives. One is strategically important, but risky. It may fail, it may upset a few stakeholders, it may force teams to change how they work. The second is not very important, but visible. It will look good in updates, it can be shown in a quarterly presentation. It gives everyone a sense of movement. The third is basically maintenance, but everyone agrees it is needed and nobody will object. Which one wins? In a purely rational system, the first one may win. In a real organization, very often the second or third one wins. Not because people cannot think, but because organizations often optimize for stability, not truth. They optimize for reduced conflict, they optimize for preserved relationships, they optimize for avoiding visible failure. And product managers sit right in the middle of this. They are expected to behave like rational system designers, but they operate inside systems driven by human psychology, politics, history, fear, and low-grade organizational anxiety. That is why the phrase, "we just need better prioritization," is both true and not enough. Yes, better prioritization would help, but prioritization is not just a technique. It is a conflict mechanism. It decides what matters and what does not. It creates winners and losers. It reveals whether leadership is serious or just politely performing strategy. So when someone says, "we need better prioritization," I usually want to ask, are we ready for the consequences of better prioritization? Because if not, we do not have a prioritization problem. We have a courage problem. Or maybe more precisely, we have an incentive problem. This is why experienced product leaders often become less ideological over time. Earlier in your career, it is tempting to believe that every problem has a clean answer. You just need the right framework, the right workshop, the right roadmap structure, the right OKRs. Later, you realize that many organizational decisions are not solved like equations. They are negotiated between incentives, personalities, timing, politics, operational pressure, fear, ambition, and exhaustion. Companies are made of humans, not diagrams. And humans do not always choose the best option. Very often, they choose the option they can survive. So maybe King Solomon's paradox is not just a psychological curiosity. Maybe it is one of the most useful ideas for understanding product leadership, because strategy always looks easier from outside the building. From the outside, you see the logic. From the inside, you feel the gravity. and that gravity is often stronger than the strategy deck. I wrote a fuller version of this argument in my LinkedIn article, where I go deeper into product management, innovation, AI, and why organizations often preserve stability even when they claim to want change. The link to the article is available in the episode description. I would be curious to hear what you think. Where have you seen this paradox in real organizational life? And more importantly, when was the last time something looked obvious from the outside, but became painfully complicated once you were inside the room?